So right now we are going to talk with a few of the authors of Practical IoT Hacking. This is going to be a real casual, like, fireside chat, very similar to our career panel that we did earlier today. So if you have any questions for the authors at any point during this chat, feel free to drop them right here in Twitch or drop them in the Practical IoT Hacking channel in our Discord. We will be moderating those for questions to send those over to the authors for answering. Be sure to drop those questions. Also make sure to check out our security consulting lounge that's going on until 6 p.m. Eastern tonight. And I also want to give a big shout out to our sponsors, Refirm Labs and INE, for making this fireside chat possible today. And I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to Lily, who's going to be moderating this chat for us. Thank you, Lily.
Thanks, Rachel. Hey, everyone. It's nice to, I guess, not see you, but be here with all of you. I'm Lily. I'm a security reporter at Wired magazine. And yeah, I'm excited to hear from these folks. I'm joined by Fotios Chantzis. He's laying the foundation for a safe and secure artificial general intelligence at OpenAI. And he's been a member of the core Nmap development team since 2009 and is the creator of NCrack, Nmap's network authentication cracking tool. And I'm also here with Paulino Calderon, who's a published author and international speaker with over 12 years of experience in network and application security. He's really into traveling and going to security conferences and for consulting for Fortune 500 companies. His consulting for Fortune 500 companies is with WebSec, a company he co-founded in 2011. And when he's not doing all that traveling and working, he spends peaceful days enjoying the beach in Cozumel, Mexico, which that's where I want to be right now for sure. Hey guys, how are you doing?
Hey, we're pretty good.
Thanks for inviting us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here with you. So the book, Practical IoT Hacking, you're some of the co-authors of the book, like Rachel was saying, and you call it the definitive guide to attacking the Internet of Things. So there's a lot of attacking that can go on with the Internet of Things. So I'm curious, how did you all come together to work on this book and create this book, and kind of how did you approach making it the definitive guide? Because it seems like that is a tall order.
Yeah, that's a long story actually. So I'll try to be as brief as possible. I think it all started with Paulino and me doing some work over at the Nmap project, the network security scanner. Back in 2009, I was actually a student at Google Summer of Code and working at the Nmap project. And while I was developing the NCrack network authentication cracking tool, I was really delving into the the nitty-gritty details of different network protocols, and spent 2 Google Summer of Codes actually there, 2009 and 2010. And then realized after a while that I had done a lot of research in these protocols and knew how they worked, because I had to do that in order to develop those modules for NCrack. And I was thinking that since I already had all these research notes, maybe it would be a good idea to write something more structured, like a book, because when writing a book, it's something that forces you to structure everything more coherently and also make it as simple as possible, so that your your readers, the target audience, can understand it easily. And this actually makes you learn along the way of doing that. So I originally wrote a simple proposal to Bill Pollock of No Starts Press about potentially doing a book on analyzing network protocols, but focusing more on their authentication side, because that would be a way to also cross-promote NCRAC, because NCRAC basically what it does is it's like a glorified brute forcer, so it tries to understand for each of the modules it has how the authentication part of these protocols works, and then tries to try a bunch of credentials against all these protocols. But there are those protocols like SSH or RDP. RDP has like a specification of more than 500 pages, so it's actually hard to implement a module for that particular one, and things like SSH. So Bill told us that this wouldn't necessarily be a great idea for a book. It might be better suited as a series of blog posts, because the target audience would be quite niche, and it might be too specialized basically. So getting that answer from Bill, went back to the drawing board and decided that thought that since back then I was already working at Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, and was my main line of work was hacking medical devices, which was really exciting. I had amassed a lot of experience basically performing all the security assessments against these devices. So healthcare security was quite important, because vendors were had a lot of security debt and technical debt in their products, and we were encountering very high risk vulnerabilities that were easily exploitable, and were usually a result of either misconfiguration or just leaving debugging ports open, things that could easily have been avoided. But because of how immature the security posture of these and the security programs of these vendors were back then, were just those vulnerabilities were everywhere. So I sent another proposal to Bill. At that point, he said that this is a much better idea, because medical device security is important. It's also important to raise awareness about it, because when we have to do with healthcare security, the implications there are much higher, right? Because some of the devices we were assessing in terms of their security were, from implantable pacemakers to surgical robots to infusion pumps. All of this, could have disastrous consequences if exploited by adversaries. But Bill counter-proposed another idea, which would be to write about the superset of medical devices, which is IoT. IoT basically encompasses all kinds of smart devices, including medical ones, routers, IP cameras, smart treadmills, everything. And at that point, I had all the other co-authors join. Evangelos Dermajoglu, he also had done a lot of assessments on the medical device security field, and we had also worked at a previous security consulting company. Ioannis Tais, again, similar thing. Paulino Calderon, whom I knew from the Enema project, also with lots of experience in network security. And Bo Woods, who is a member of the I Am the Cavalry grassroots initiative, and has done extensive work on consulting, and also has a lot of experience with, how some of the, legal frameworks and policy frameworks in IoT and generally in information security. So that's how that's how the whole journey started. And I think, one of at least my main motivators for writing this book was first because it would be one of the best ways for us to learn even more by teaching the stuff we know in a much more structured and coherent way. And secondly, to raise awareness about an important topic, which is IoT, which includes medical devices, because there are many consumers out there that don't realize that, for example, when they set up their router, they have default passwords, or that the at-home monitoring device that communicates with their implantable pacemaker and sends data to the cloud might have a hard-coded encryption key that could be abused, could be extracted by attackers and then reused to communicate with a pacemaker and do all this nasty stuff. Yeah, this is basically how it all started.
No, and as you said, the words, the definitive guides are pretty big, right? So we did our best to come up with a holistic approach for assessing all these devices. So it's broken down in different modules, and in every step we try to give them a methodology that they can follow, some tools, and practical examples as well, as they're in their own lab, control labs, that they can repeat these exercises without having to get expensive equipment. And basically we try to get the lower cost devices that we can replicate common attacks. And that's why we decided to go for the definitive guide, which I know they're pretty bold statements.
Well, first of all, Fotios, thank you for that expansive, but very fascinating, like walk through this whole process, because it's really interesting to hear the sort of the back and forth with the publisher of, it's a funny situation where actually you started with a much more narrow idea and landed on pretty much the broadest possible thing. I feel like often projects move in the other direction of like, well, that's too broad. You couldn't possibly tackle that. So it's pretty amazing, and it's a cool thing. I like that idea that to just go for it, like, and go for the whole thing and bring in everyone's different perspectives and expertise, to bring that to bear in one guide. I don't know. I think that's cool. In terms of learning methodologies to attack IoT devices, I mean, this isn't really going to be a spoiler, I think, to anyone in this audience, but like you were saying, like you both were saying, the thing you discover from learning those techniques, right, is that there's so much rampant insecurity in the space, right? Like, I'm curious, for someone to walk through and learn from some of the examples, and like you were saying, some of the sort of home demos and things people can do themselves. Spoil the book of what will people discover when they read through and start trying this themselves.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like Paulino mentioned, we break down the book into all these different sections where we decompose the methodology into the hardware layer, the network layer, the radio layer, and then we also have some additional layers having to do with the mobile application. So we explore even how you can extract applications from your Android or iOS device, and how you can leverage those to exploit even the cloud components and the smart device as well. And our methodology, it also includes steps such as passive reconnaissance. So where you Google things like the FCC ID, where you can learn a lot about the frequency of that is used for that particular radio communication pattern that the device might be using, or things like Google patents, where you can learn a lot of information that is public out there about the device, and this can help you first do a threat model of the device, so see what kind of components actually interact with the network or are more exposed, or what other things about its architecture you can learn that can help you pinpoint all these vulnerabilities. And for each of these other layers, we basically try to find some of the most important protocols and interfaces that we see. So, for example, in the hardware layer, we explore UART, the serial interface. We explore JTAG, which is a debugging interface, and serial wire debug, similar one that you also see in devices. I2C and SPI. These are all protocols that that you regularly see when you disassemble and you take apart the device, and you can also leverage to to exploit the device. So one of the examples is that we've seen even medical devices that have been left with an exposed UART port that if you connect the right adapter there, and you're basically just you basically pop up a root shell on the device by booting the device and interfacing with UART. Or you can extract the firmware by using some of the other protocols, things like that. So we try to be as broad as possible, but also focus on the ones that matter most. On the radio section, for example, where we explore things such as RFID and NFC, and Wi-Fi Direct, again, all protocols that you regularly encounter in IoT devices. we had to make some, I guess, some sacrifices there, because again, the book would be too large at that point. It's already like over 450 pages. And for example, the Zigbee protocol, we decided not to include. Instead, we decided to explore more about LoRa, which is the long-range protocol. And the reasoning there was that it's a relatively newer protocol that hasn't been explored or analyzed in other books or articles that much. There's more limited information about it. And it seems like a cool protocol. It's used in sensors, in farms, and also it's kind of easy as long as you find the right tools to, to capture the traffic and analyze it and, play around with the protocol. And I think, yeah, this is actually that chapter can be could be considered one of the highlights of the book, because again, it's something that we haven't seen anywhere else. And then on the network layer, yeah, we explore, I guess, more standards stuff like zero configuration protocols, from MDNS and DNSSD to web services discovery, and some other things. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention that in the hardware section, we also explore firmware extraction, which is also very, very common as a technique to help you analyze the device. Paulino,
Yeah,
what else?
it was definitely a challenge to come up with the content. It was definitely the broader topic made us have to cut down a lot of content at the end. Even some specific vulnerabilities that we wanted to show, we had to remove them at the end because of different reasons. And that's one of the cool things that we found out, or we figured out in the middle of the book. There's so much, or there are so many new technologies coming out in the IoT space, that there's so much opportunity for the InfoSec community to come up with new attacks, check even if all the attacks work on newer technologies, to come up with new tooling. So there's definitely an interesting opportunity as a community. And that's why we focus on, as Fotios mentioned, some newer protocols that might not have been as well documented. And we even work with a team in Mexico that are creating open source hardware, and they help us with the LoRa stick and some of the software that I think Fotios was having issues with.
Yeah.
And after that, that became another idea, and they're going to keep expanding on that product. So as a result from that book, there's some new hardware products coming out for LoRa.
That's cool. Yeah, that's a big thing I'm wondering about, but it's a tough question. It's sort of a big question. Is what I don't know if from working on this project and synthesizing all of this and kind of putting it in like some type of order and sense, like Fotios was describing. Did you all feel like you got more insight into the sort of industry changes you wish would happen with IoT, to harden these devices, or wish on the defender side, maybe not the offensive side, but did it help create any insights, or is it so dead obvious what needs to happen that wasn't so much of a factor in this project?
I would say it's something in between. I mean, obviously, some of these devices should come secure by default, should be shipped secure by default. I think one of the things that Bo was working on was understanding what that new UK law about, or the code of conduct, I guess, that the UK had proposed about IoT devices, where they should come whenever they are shipped, they should have some basic, security defaults, such as even, prompting the user to change the password, or at least having, I believe, unique default passwords if necessary, so that it's not the same one. But I think that, yeah, the other some of these might sometimes, because as an infosec researcher, you get too much entrenched into the the nitty-gritty details of every device. You can easily also lose sight of the big picture. And yeah, I mean, there are some obvious things for us that, like for example, when you have a debugging port, out in a production environment where you don't necessarily need it, or at least you say that if the vendor has the reasoning that, yeah, I need that debugging port to be there when it's a medical device and I need to come on site and debug it, I need to be able to access that debugging port. But at the same time, that the very same interface can be abused by attackers. Then some of these are common sense that say, okay, then just put at least some minimal authentication there, so that you just can't connect your JTAG, your JTAGulator, and then some other hardware tool that will be able to talk to the device without any kind of authentication. But I would say that there are also complications, and that's where the insight, I guess, that you mentioned comes. It's and I've seen that especially, and I can speak from my experience in the healthcare security, that it's actually a complex issue, because some of these, I'll take an example of the DICOM protocol. DICOM is a protocol used for images. It's actually both a network protocol and a file protocol. So as a file protocol, it basically tells the software how it should lay out the images and all the metadata of from an ultrasound scan or a CT scan and all that, because there you have high resolution images that might be gigabytes sometimes. And as a network protocol, it basically says how does the ultrasound scanner or the CT scanner or the MRI machine sends these images to like a PAX server, which is a picture archiving and communication server. Just basically a database over that will be communicated over the network with the medical device, and will store these images so that then they can be accessed by the physician. So DICOM is a very old protocol and complicated. And the thing is that the specification of it has been updated so that it supports some kind of encryption over the network. But the thing is that all these hospitals, all these healthcare, basically all the healthcare system has all these medical devices that are really old and would never be able to support this, updated version of DICOM. It would be a huge, hassle, and it would take a huge amount of money to update the devices. And in some cases, it might not even be done. It might not even possible because, to update so radically the firmware of some of these devices, and to also have the vendor care about it instead of saying, oh, I'm going to support it in the next device that I will be shipping out. I don't care about, just having all these backwards updates for my older device. Just buy the new one. But the thing is that hospitals keep using these medical devices for many, many years. It doesn't make sense to buy new ones, every 1 or 2 years, especially for those devices that are super expensive or do their job well, and the physician is used to them and doesn't want to change them.
And this is a general IoT issue too, right? That people don't replace their routers or their CCTV cameras or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a generic issue, but I think in the healthcare fair it's even more pronounced because it's much, the whole field is much slower moving. And in those cases, I mean, the only solution is to find a workaround or just find other ways to reduce the attack surface. So just segment these devices in an isolated part of the network. But even that, again, takes a lot of work, takes a lot of planning, and so there are not easy answers for every of these security problems. And I mean, I think the responsibility is not just from the vendor side; it's also from I guess in the healthcare field, it's also has to do with how much attention and how much budget they have to allocate to these things. So it kind of becomes very convoluted at that point. And
for me, after going back to testing devices, I realized that even though the industry has matured a lot, it has been regulated, it's only in a few countries. And that comes back to when we were doing testing on one of the products that we mentioned in the book, or we were going to mention in the book, I realized that some vulnerabilities, like, they were there like 10 years ago when I was testing these types of devices. And I kind of like moved to network and application security. And now that I got back into it, I realized this issue isn't really gone, because a lot of the products that are being out there, they're not being made in those countries where the industry is more regulated and they're putting better security practices. At least there was more than one case that we tried to contact the vendor to report one of the vulnerabilities in these IoT devices. I don't want to name countries specifically, but we didn't get a reply. So we were waiting for months for a reply, and we never got a reply. And these are products that when we started testing them, the security implications, the private implications were way worse than we expected. So when we were looking at vulnerabilities, we were just, I don't know, in this specific case, we were testing a smart water bottle. So we were just looking at their Bluetooth interface to try to figure out if they had basic errors so we can spoof messages. And at the end, we found out that the bottle was recording the location of all users periodically, like every 10 minutes. And it will share it back to an endpoint in some foreign country. And nothing really said anything about that. As a user, you don't expect to be having a bottle that will share your location all the time. And those are kind of like the issues that hit me back to reality, that even though the industry has grown a lot, we need to remember that regulations and these new methodologies or procedures are not being applied everywhere. And there's a lot of startups as well that they don't have the resources, or their programs are not as mature, and they don't follow these procedures. And we need to realize that insecure products are still out there, and there's still a lot of them.
Yeah, I think that is a really excellent point. And there's a good question in the Discord that I'm going to get to in just a second. But I think, I mean, I don't mean to be sort of uninsightful or just saying what everyone knows, but it's really interesting to hear your experience. And I think other researchers feel the same, that it's like, you come back 15 years later and there's just not a lot of visible progress at the end of the day, and it sort of is like I think I saw people using this meme about IoT specifically, but the stuck ship in the Suez Canal and the like tiny tractor trying to dig out a little bit, there are a lot of amazing initiatives on IoT security, but it's like, the scale of the problem and the interconnected issues are just massive, because it's like also medical devices are an interesting case, but in general, a lot of these devices are super cheap, being sort of mass produced by white labels. Like, there's so many layers of problems with, finding the incentives to really change the structure. And I think, Paulino, your point about how only certain countries or certain regions or certain companies, just these small subsets are beginning to invest or mandate investment and prioritization, but it's like that is just the little tractor next to the huge ship. So it's kind of daunting. I mean, as a reporter, I know I write the same stories year after year after year. So, I can't imagine how it feels on the research side, but probably pretty delightful from the offensive side. It's just more and more and more. It's like a playground.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question that I see in Discord, very nice shout outs about the book and a fan. But the question is, for regular pen testing, there's a ton of free material for practice, like online CTFs, downloadable VMs, etc. But the tools for IoT pen testing are expensive. This is where I found some difficulty with my thesis. I want it to be as practical as possible, but I'm on a limited budget. It sounds like this ties into some of what you all were talking about. I'm on a limited budget, and I've only found a small handful of tools and devices I can use. Can you recommend any budget-friendly scenarios to include in my thesis?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's what we also struggled when we were doing all the brainstorming for the book, where we were trying, like Paulino mentioned, to find all these devices, both as target devices and as attacking tools, that would be both cheap and easily accessible, and would not go out of stock in the next few years. So that at the same time, they are popular enough and they're still being developed. It's it's not an easy answer, but for example, one of the the Swiss Army knife of hardware protocols that we use extensively is the Bus Pirate. It's a very common tool that most people know and use. Supports many different protocols. There are some others like the Shikra, and we also list in the appendix of our book a lot of other tools that we find interesting and we have used and we recommend. As target devices, for example, in the hardware section, as an easy way to showcase some of the techniques and vulnerabilities, we use, for example, the Black Pill, which is an STM32F103 microcontroller. For things such as Bluetooth Low Energy, we use the Ubertooth. There are some, in some cases, there are some tools that have been, I guess, that are more established in a sense that they are very popular and there's a huge development behind them. For NFC, for example, everyone uses the Proxmark 3. It's again that might be more expensive, but it's hard to find a good alternative. Paulino, I don't know if you want to mention any others that you might have in mind.
Yeah, regarding like software, he mentioned that there's a lot of CTFs for regular pen testing, but not so many for IoT. There's a new OWASP project called OWASP IoT Goat, which is basically a vulnerable OpenWRT image with embedded IoT vulnerabilities and in a CTF style. So he can look that up. And as for laboratories, I think Fotis mentioned most of them or some of them, but you can also try the ESP32, and basically any Arduino or Raspberry Pi box, you could use it to emulate or communicate with some of these traditional older protocols. But you will always face that difficulty. If you're targeting new protocols, you might need to get the specific hardware to communicate with that protocol. And it's at the end of, if you do this with a lot of protocols, you end up with boxes full of devices, and it happens.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it makes sense to also mention that in some cases, you might also find certain, I guess, cheaper alternatives of some of the hardware devices from, places such as eBay or AliExpress. Um, it, I mean, they might not be as robust as the original ones, but and they might take longer to ship and arrive to your place. But certainly there are some alternatives out there.
Yeah, maybe we could talk a bit more about other sort of advice for just getting started. That was, I think, a lot of great, like really specific. Oh, good answer. Our questioner is saying thank you. Yeah, just I think I'm just curious about, because you all did all this work to synthesize everything into the book and all collaborate on I don't know. Again, I know it's such a big topic that it's hard to have just like easy takeaways, but I'm curious from putting it together, kind of observations on what are ways to kind of, or what can people take from this, even if they're really on their first weeks or months of exploring this stuff? Like, what were some sort of fun things you reminded yourself of from going back through all this?
I think that one of the first easy, I guess, insights is that you can actually, delve into the IoT security world very easily by just looking at your own place and seeing what devices lie around there. Because we now have tons of those smart devices everywhere, from your router to a CCTV camera that might be lying around, to your your Alexa device, to everything really.
Smart TV.
So yeah, the smart TV. Like one of the last chapter that we wrote in the book that talks about the IoT ecosystem as in general, also walks through the steps to hack a smart treadmill. So right now we're at this age, at this time, where everything becomes smart, in the sense that it's network connected and has some extra functionality. And whenever these smart devices have some kind of network exposure, either through Wi-Fi or these all other protocols that we explore, there is the potential for abuse. There is the potential for exploitation, and readers can just start playing around with their own smart home devices. So yeah, it's actually easier than it sounds. In some cases, it might not be, I guess, as straightforward, and that's why in the book we recommend some easier microcontrollers. For example, the black pill that I mentioned already has all these programmable ways to interact with different things, such as serial wire debug or UART, and you can also use Arduino to program it. So it makes it easier for a beginner to just play with these protocols in a, I guess, more constrained and easily accessible environment that they would also be able to debug instead of just, being trying to, for example, hack their IP camera that might have one of these interfaces, but might not be as straightforward to find, in the PCB, or might have other complications. This was also one of the main purposes for when we're doing all this brainstorming, to make this as straightforward and as simple as possible, so that the reader can easily get accustomed to all these different techniques and then apply them on their own devices at home.
Yeah, preferably don't open your $200 or $300 Sonos system, which they have been known for being vulnerable. So.
There's another question in the chat, but first I'm going to skip the line and ask you my question, which for both of you is, I was thinking about the smart water bottle, and also this week, I think it was Cisco Talos had found vulnerabilities in an air fryer. So what is both of your most ridiculous thing you've ever hacked IoT device?
I think Paulino can also share some of the a video that we have of the smart water bottle that might be fun to watch. As for I guess for me, I think I would say not the most ridiculous, but I think the most interesting was all the research on the implantable pacemakers. And there's actually some public research out there about them. There was a huge story back then with MedSec and St. Jude's, Abbott St. Jude, and how they basically had published a bunch of vulnerabilities that could potentially drain the battery, and also through the at-home monitoring device be able to communicate to the pacemaker or the ICD. And deliver, a shock to the patient, or change the configuration of the pacemaker. And this is the implications there is that you can actually, cause the death of the patient. And I think the research in that and in other pacemakers has been really fascinating, because most of these use proprietary RF protocols that there's no information about them out there, so you have to do a lot of reverse engineering and basically approach it in many different ways to be able to understand what's happening behind the scenes. I think I would say that, and also back then there was also a certain surgical robot that was very interesting because of how big it was, and how you could, if you hacked it, basically what would be the implications again of a compromised robot that is used by physicians to perform surgery.
You make it stab people instead of opening it.
Yeah, well, yeah, might sound funny, but actually if that happened, it would be really, really bad.
Yeah, for me, I try not to get, trash. So I try not to get some of these really ridiculous devices out there.
You gotta have standards, right?
No, but I've seen even egg baskets that when your eggs go bad in your fridge. I've seen coffins. There's also some cases of rifles that they had Bluetooth enabled. They shared the research, I think, a couple of years ago. So there's even a Twitter account called Internet of Shit I've been following for a while. It's definitely good to find out, good to follow.
Yeah.
I'm gonna share mine. I actually don't know. I mean, not hacking, but stories I've written about hacking. I have to think about the IoT one, but I don't know, maybe this is just a silly aside, but the one I wanted to say was when you were talking earlier about protocols where the standard is like so massive that and so inscrutable that things get misimplemented all the time in all sorts of ways because people just don't really understand it. And I was shocked. This is probably old news to all of you, but I was shocked when I learned just how massive the Bluetooth standard is, that it's like 1,000 pages or something. That is my like ridiculous, incredible thing. And I mean, obviously that's not just an IoT thing, but I wrote a story once about flaws in pacemakers and other medical devices that were related, or I guess maybe it wasn't pacemakers, I would have to check, but medical devices that were related to BLE. And it's just like, well, yeah, I mean, if your standard is that massive, no one's even ever read it, you know? Anyway, that's my
I mean,
go ahead.
Yeah. No, on that note, I think it's worthwhile mentioning that many of these protocols, other than the fact that they're massive and very hard to implement, in some cases, and we see that very often in network protocols, the RFC, the specification has a lot of sections that instead of must as a keyword, they say should. And should is actually where the vendor has a lot of leeway to, just do their own thing, because it won't affect the protocol in such a way that it wouldn't be able to, interface with other devices. But still, that change in the implementation might be the cause of a vulnerability. And we've seen that happen. We've seen that happen even with protocols like TCP or IPsec or others. And again, the way that protocol has been implemented might vary from vendor to vendor, and this is often also the cause of some really severe flaws.
Lately, there have been a bunch of big coordinated disclosures about like TCP/IP, like old bugs, that have just been sitting forever. But that's super interesting, must versus should. Again, you all probably already know that, but that is a cool one for me to know about.
And I think one of the issues that happen too is that a lot of these companies, at least when they're starting or they're small, they don't write everything from scratch. They take from existing solutions, existing frameworks, some open source projects out there, and that's the reason you see a lot of reuse for binaries across different types of devices or frameworks.
Totally. And then it'll affect just all sorts of devices that are totally unrelated and disparate, but they just all reused that same code.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have a question. Here's a very close reader, very specific question. In chapter 9 of the book on firmware, you discuss using virtual platforms, QEMU and Firmdyne, for emulating firmware for study. Do these offer robust enough simulations to get started, at least for those where unencrypted firmware is available?
Yeah, I think, they're not perfect. I have to say that up front. As a start, I think it's fine to do some experimentation with, but I wouldn't say they are, the complete substitute of actually having the firmware itself. Actually interfacing with the device, with the firmware installed. So yeah, because the way that Firmdyne works in this and virtualization platforms like QEMU is that in some cases they might not implement all the different instructions. So in those cases, you might even not be able to actually emulate the firmware. You might be stuck at the just the initialization of it, and we came across these cases very often. That's why we chose some some specific, devices and firmware to demonstrate that were, pretty straightforward as for beginners. And but I think this is the best tooling which is at the same time open source and easily available, is out there right now. At the end of the day, if you want to be fully certain if a vulnerability works, is to first try to use the emulation to kind of pinpoint any problem, and then you'd at the end of the day eventually have to test it on a real device that has that specific firmware version. I mean, you have to be thorough in these cases. Never rely on just the emulation.
And for unencrypted firmware, it's robust enough. I think it will work fairly well for certain things. So definitely try it out.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to give everyone last call if you have other questions. I think in terms of as we get towards our end of time, yeah, I don't know. What else would each of you want people to sort of know about the book, or just I just feel like sometimes when I come to the end of a big project and get it out there. Well, one question: how long has the book been out?
Well, the Kindle version, the digital version was out, I think, back in February, if I'm correct. But then the physical, the hard copies actually became available very recently, like a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, I thought I was the only one who didn't have one, so I'm glad.
We don't have one yet. That tells you a lot.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Some of my friends had already, purchased it, and they now send me pictures with the book, and I don't even have it yet.
So. I think none of the authors do.
Probably not. Yeah.
That's sort of like yeah, I feel like the pandemic has really messed with all of that. Like, I had a story in the print issue of Wired, and I didn't get my hands on a copy till months later. So but yeah, when you come to the end of a project, it's kind of recent that it has gotten out there. I'm curious, like, what feedback you've gotten so far, and I don't know, just where you're wanting to go as you do events like this and talk to people about the book and hear from people about the book, what you're hoping people will take from it, or hearing that they're most interested in, or things you didn't expect. Just sort of what's next as the book takes its journey.
Yeah, I guess one of the things to mention is that because we broke down the different sections in their own self-contained chapters, I think it's easy for the reader to just skip some of the chapters they might not be interested in, and just directly go on those that they are. And also wanted to highlight that in almost all cases we have these exercises that are step by step, so that they are easily reproducible by the reader, and also both the attacking tool and the target device are most of the times cheap and easily available on the internet. I mean, we are looking forward to any kind of feedback and any type of comments that will help us, potentially improve the book in the future. Maybe if there is, particular demand for a specific protocol that people would want to have a chapter written about, we could also potentially do this as a series of blog posts, or book version 2.0 potentially. Yeah, I don't know, Paulino, what do you think?
We have received pretty good feedback. At some point, I think we were #1 on network security on Amazon, and at least for me, we put at least 2 projects. Like, I'm thinking, one of the things that I would like to see is start seeing more contributions to OWASP IoT Code, the project itself. And another thing that we put out there is our methodologies. So, they're obviously there's a lot to cover in those methodologies, so we might have missed something. And it's when you have time constraints, maybe we didn't think of something and we missed something at that moment. So any feedback about the methodologies will be great. We're looking to provide or come up with a more holistic approach to document all these procedures. So I don't know, that's what I would like to see. And in general, any feedback is like greatly appreciated. And even if you don't like it, tell us why you didn't like it. We can improve next time.
Yeah.
Bring it on. All right, well, that's I think a good sort of resting place. I see that the Security Consulting Networking Lounge is coming up next after this chat. Ask leading experts your burning questions. But yeah, to both of you, I appreciate you doing this. It was really fun to talk to you, and I learned a lot. And yeah, I hope everyone in the audience enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Don't forget to check out, what is it? PracticalIoTHacking.com?
Well, yeah, if you just Google Practical IoT Hacking, it should be
or go to
number one.
website.
Or No Start Press or Amazon. Yeah.
Buy the book. That's the point, right?